as we approach the lock, we will pull in to the towpath side of the canal, where one or more of the party get off the boat and go and prepare the lock for either going uphill or downhill. When we arrive at the lock, we check the condition of the lock to see if it's full or empty, and as this lock is almost full, we look up the canal, we look upstream to see if there's a boat coming the other way, and if there is a boat coming the other way, we allow them to use the water to take the lock down to prepare us for coming up. It merely saves water for the canal. We now need to drain the lock because it's full of water, and we need the lock drained so we can open the gates and let the boat in. We have here an anti-vandal mechanism. In order to unlock it, we use our lock key, and it merely unlocks to the left. You'll hear a clunk and you will feel this plunger come down. That lock gear mechanism is now free to be used. We take the windlass, and on the downstream locks we use the big hole, and the upstream locks we use the little hole. So in this case, to drain the lock, we use the big end of the windlass, and we simply put the windlass on and we wind up the paddle which will allow the water to leave the lock. And I have my left hand here on the brake to make sure that the brake is held off so that I can wind the paddle up to let the water out of the lock. Having got the paddle in the fully up position, I apply the brake with my left hand and I remove the windlass from the winding gear. Because if we leave the windlass on, in the event of a brake failure, the paddle will fall and the windlass will spin. At best it falls in the canal, at worst it hits someone. Once the levels have equalised and we've been able to open the lock gates to allow the boat in, we then need to close the paddles. So we hold the brake off with one hand and we wind the paddle back down, controlling it so that it doesn't go into free fall. On some of the well-worn mechanisms, if it goes into free fall, it can easily break the lock paddle itself if it falls too quickly. So we wind it down to the bottom and then we can reactivate the anti-vandal device so that young people can't let the water out. Now, having got the boat into the lock, we have closed the downstream gates, and after ensuring that the downstream paddles are also closed, we're then in a condition that we can allow water into the lock to allow the boat to be lifted up. And on all our locks here on the Rochdale Canal, we have anti-vandal keys. This is different to the downstream one. This is where we simply have to unscrew the lock using the anti-vandal key, which then allows us access to the winding gear. Now, when we let the water into the lock, if we were to open both of these paddles fully, the pressure of water would move the boat around in the lock a lot, and it would be very, very difficult to control. So, using the small end of the windlass on the upstream locks, we detach the cog and we wind it up just 6 inches to start with the help of the dog, and you will will see the paddle ratchet or the paddle rack is coming up, and to begin with, that's all we need to do. We put the pot back in and we take the windlass off so that if that fails, the windlass doesn't get spun and flung. Now that the lock is half full and it can take an increased flow, put the windlass back on and we can open the paddle fully. Take care to keep your left hand away from the rack and away from here. And now, having got the levels correct and the lock gate open, we can now close the paddle. And again, we release the lock and we wind the paddle down so that it doesn't fall under its own weight and get damaged. Then we can replace the guard and reattach the anti-vandal lock. Again, using the anti-vandal key and help from the dog. Who's a clever dog? Yes, you are.